being recorded and shown on TV eventually, or maybe live for all I know. Mrs. Milton, will you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Orris will be late. Mr. Slocum.
Here.
Mr. Burway.
Present.
Mr. Jenks will be late. Ms. Nichols. Ms. Pavano.
Here.
Mr. Talbot.
Here.
Mr. Belliver.
Here.
Mr. Walsh.
Here.
We do have a quorum present.
Thank you, Mrs. Milton. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. So tonight's meeting is a discussion of the FY 2021-2022 operating budget, the annual capital budget, the 5-year capital expenditure plan, but more specifically focused tonight, as our budget chair, Mr. Bowery, will indicate as I toss this over to him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Slocum. Appreciate that. Yes, this is our 9th of our budget workshops, and we're not done. A lot of work to do still, keeping the mill rate as reasonable as possible and our expenditures in line with the expectations of our residents. Tonight, the town manager has a review of personnel, mainly the new or enhanced or added personnel that we're going to talk about. We also want to get an update, which is why the chiefs are here, because they have something to say in that, and as well as Director Nowotny. We also have a discussion and some information regarding expenditures that might have been in the budget that we expended or lost revenue that would be allowed to be covered by the ARP or the COVID money, if you will, from the national law, the $1.9 trillion that was signed on March 11th, that filters down to us at $200-something per resident, and in the tune of $5 to $8 million for us to be spent in the next 30 months. And it's very limited on what it can be spent on. So we'll have a discussion of that tonight as well. And some of the expenditures, we'll talk about those as well, that we've gone over, some of which are in the Public Works Department. So it's good that George is here. And with that, I guess, Sean, I'll hand it over to you. You're the one that did all the work and have all the documents, Jim. So.
All right. Well, no, thank you very much. And perhaps maybe to start, I know there were a few questions that were asked at the last meeting, some on the cost of bulky waste and a few other items. And I didn't know if maybe we should start with those, so when we go to personnel, we might have a better chance of Rob and Tim being able to be on the call. Does that work for you? Okay,
sure, that's fine. Absolutely. All right.
It's sort of easier to start with maybe an inverse a little bit here. So I guess maybe one of the more straightforward in terms of responses would be on bulky waste. So let me just give you kind of a quick answer to the question of what that would cost should the council want to do a bulky waste collection this year. And again, I'm sure the details and particulars, as Don and I were emailing today, will, if we were going to commit to doing so, I think the Solid Waste Committee would want to weigh in on obviously some of the more specifics of when and items collected and all of that stuff. So this is all subject and very preliminary, of course, but let me go ahead and just share my screen really quick. Hopefully that worked. So hopefully, again, this is relatively straightforward. You'll see this is right out of the contract with AJ Waste. And for 2021, we have a fee for the pickup of $155,000 that's listed in our contract as an option to exercise, and plus the disposal cost to be determined. You'll see that last time that disposal cost was at $99 a ton for the disposal of the bulky waste. Let's see, if I click over to this tab, do you now see George's report from bulky waste last time? Does everyone see that okay? Okay, so last in 2019, when we had bulky waste, the council had appropriated $290,000. It ended up being just slightly above that, $293,000. Really because we had historically high tonnage. You'll see at 1451, it was the highest tonnage compared to the prior years. But I also thought it's helpful, especially for some of the newer members, to see we had done a collection in 04, 06, 08, and then not again until 14 and then 19. And again, there's a lot of information in here and some other recommendations. Of course, like I said, I'm sure Solid Waste Committee would want to dive through that. But in short, I think, while we can't guarantee the tonnage just yet, we'll have to discuss with AJ and negotiate what that rate would be. The tonnage rate. If we estimated around 1,500 tons and at around $100 a ton, again, we expect it probably to go up a little bit. Although we could hope, and if you saw some of those other numbers, harder to predict where the tonnage number is going to be, right? Because of COVID, is it going to be as high as last time, even though that was only 2 years as opposed to a 5-year gap? So a little bit of uncertainty there, but I think between a total that tipping fee would be about $150,000 to maybe $170,000. I think you're looking at around $300,000 to $325,000 is the appropriation. So that would be the long answer to a relatively short question of what bulky waste would cost. And we would recommend probably an appropriation between $300,000 and $325,000. I don't know with George here, if there's anything I left out, George, or had incorrect there.
I think that was very complete. I agree with everything.
Oh, perfect. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I know it's preliminary, but if there's any questions.
One thing that I did, I'll hand it over to Mr. Walsh first as chairman of Solid Waste, and then I have a couple logistical comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, I know this has been discussed, but this money could possibly come from some of that COVID money to cover this, so it won't be put in as an expense under our regular expenses, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it possibly is the key word. We don't have definitive answers yet, but yes, I think we can make the case, first of all, as one-time usage, and then again with the COVID-related activities, home improvement projects, cleaning out as people were home longer than they ever were before, and as a service and really a public health service. I think Mr. Borwe made that case before too. That I think there's a lot that we could probably support. And from what we understand, the guidelines are going to be, there will be a degree of flexibility with some of those items. So I'm relatively confident we could include it, but we won't know for sure until we get that actual guidance.
Well, the reason I mean, this weekend there's a townwide tag sale. I'm sure you've heard of, with like over 100 households having a tag sale. So a lot of people are cleaning out, and I think that shows that there's going to be a need for this, and I'm hoping that money can come from the COVID money, and we can do this in the fall.
Yeah, I do think that's a good indication of how popular it would be if we did it.
Just Mr. Walsh, all set? Just logistically, if your committee does approve this, which it sounds as though it's positive, and we certainly have comments from the council members and the public, their expectation that with the remodeling people have done, like the town manager said, new furniture and all that, due to being home more. I would be in favor of this if the money come from the COVID, and I would be in favor of it not being added as an expenditure in next year's budget as a way to increase the expenditures. And I would also be in favor of it where we would use the funds as a one-time expenditure. So it's a one-time expenditure and there's a one-time revenue for it. So it's off. It's not in budget where now the budget's increased by $300,000 and we're using one-time revenues of $300,000. It's a one-time deal that can't stand on its own separately.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we could only do that if in fact they say 100% of it could be paid for by the COVID money, correct? Or the relief money, whatever you want to call it.
And that's the expectation.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, are there other questions or comments regarding that topic? Mr. Talbot?
I would just echo your statement, Chairman Borwe, that if we could do, I don't care whether it's in the budget or not, because it's being paid by a one-time revenue. So whether it's in there or not, I would certainly be in favor of using the ARP money to do it as a one-off.
Right. My only concern with that is that if we were not to have it as a one-off, if we were to have it in the budget, then we also have to include the revenue, and then it's one-time revenue and expenditure. So a year from now, we're coming in and the public works budget is $300,000 more, and so we either have to cut it, which there isn't always an appetite to actually cut, It's just cutting usually the increase. So if we can do it in such a way that it's a one-time separate expenditure and separate revenue, I would be in favor of that.
That's kind of sounds like nuance to me, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't it in fact be, why would they would put it in next year's, they wouldn't repeat the expense next year. So it wouldn't show up as a budgeted item, would it?
Not if it was not put in the 2022 budget or 2023 budget, no.
Right. So I don't really see it as an issue. Maybe I'm mistaken, but whatever. I guess
right.
my question to the group would be this: does the council want to consider doing this if it's 50% fundable? I mean, how do we feel about that? I mean, there seems to be a sense that there's need. Are we going to walk away if it's not funded by ARP, which I guess is what this money is called? Seems like that's plagiarism, but in case, I mean, how do we
Not
feel?
AARP.
Oh, that's AARP. See, I'm not a member. I refuse. Okay.
I would think, I would just, real quick, I would just add, if there are communities in the state that are using it as a way to balance their budget, then I think we can creatively find a way to use it to pay for bulky waste.
I agree.
And I think between Jim and Sean, they have the creativity to find a way to be able to work it into something that would get us a bulky waste pickup in the fall.
I think that's excellent. I think that's a good approach.
I agree.
And it's good to be out there in public with it.
And I would
Okay.
support that. If people are very anxious for it, so I think it's good.
I agree.
Me too, Sandy.
Saying, yeah, and David Belliver, I see you're nodding.
Ab-
as well. So
Absolutely. I see people ask me about it all the time. Are you guys going to do it this year? I mean, you see Facebook posts about it. It's something, and I think it does go to what Don had said and what other people have said, which is that people do really, they're cleaning out. They've got stuff. They've got new stuff. Then they want to get rid of the old stuff. I think this is going to be perhaps this may be actually even though we just did it 2 years ago, I think this could actually be almost bigger than it was 2 years ago from what I'm hearing from people really sort of looking forward to this. So.
well, let's hope if there's more stuff out, there's also recycling. So, all right. So we do want to move forward with this. When will we know that criteria? Will it be by budget adoption time, Sean?
So we anticipate it will. The guidance that we received in terms of when the guidance is going to come out was for May 11th, I believe. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. That was the date that the statute had referenced as, I think, 60 days from passage, and that they would need to have notified, especially the entitlement cities that are getting the money directly, not passed through the state like we are with a sub 50,000 population. So the expectation is if those monies are hitting municipal accounts, they're going to need to tell people how you can spend it by that time. That's our hope.
Okay. So it's going to be a little tight because we've got our budget adoption shortly thereafter, but we're nimble. All right. So what other items did you want to talk about before we get to personnel?
Sure. So I know Jim prepared a spreadsheet on kind of in response to a couple of questions, but I know Sandy had asked at the last meeting about municipal COVID expenditures from fiscal 20 and the current year 21 on the town side, so to speak. I know the Board of Ed had presented a summary of theirs. And I think it is important to revisit too, because I want to make sure we don't forget the other COVID funding buckets that we've had, municipal, the coronavirus relief fund and some others that I think Jim can kind of explain where we are with offsetting municipal expenditures and some of the grant money that's coming in and the FEMA application that Jim put through. And just, I think that's important so that we're not kind of double counting anything we might try to qualify again against ARP. So maybe Jim, if that's okay, we'll go to that next.
Yeah, you want to load that up, Sean?
Yep, I can do that. And then you can walk through it. Give me 1 second. Oh, there we go. There it is. All right. All right, now it should be up there. Hopefully that's large enough to see. Is that all right for everybody? Okay. Jim, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. I think the question was asked is what did the town pay so far in COVID expenses? So I have a total there. That's the 2 years combined, fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. To date, I do expect we'll incur some more COVID expenses before the year's out. But just to give you a snapshot of where we are now, over the course of 2 years, we've got a total of 360,000 of COVID expenses, broken down between fiscal year 20, 151,000, and so far this year, 209,260. I took the liberty to just kind of summarize a very, sometimes hundreds of small purchases of, PPE and cleaning supplies. But I just thought I'd kind of give you a general breakdown between payroll, technology, supplies, and miscellaneous other costs, just to give you some idea of what goes into that. So the total there, 360,000 in expense, was offset or to be offset by approximately 379,000 of grants and other funding sources. So for fiscal year 20, we did have a very small amount that was reimbursable by FEMA. The FEMA qualifications for reimbursable expenses were pretty strict. I mean, you really had to have direct COVID contact pretty much to get anything to qualify. But there was also a municipal coronavirus relief fund that was distributed through the State Office of Policy and Management. So in fiscal 20, we were able to dovetail the FEMA reimbursement with those funds, totaled 128,574.26. So that took us through June 30th, 2020. And then in this fiscal year, we received another municipal coronavirus relief fund grant totaling 234,298. That covered expenses from July 1st through December 31st, 2020. I'm not aware of any additional grant funding for the town side at this point, other than the potential for ARP funds. We do have some of the costs that are included in the COVID expenses above were for the vaccine clinics that were being run by the Chesapeake Health District. And we did provide some police security for those clinics. So we are planning to invoice Chesapeake Health District for approximately $12,000 is what I'm estimating of police overtime when they attended those events. So all total, I'm expecting reimbursement or funding in total of 379,000 versus the 360,000 that we've spent so far. So we actually got more funding in total than our actual COVID expenses. However, and I think if you go down a little bit more, Sean, we did have some of those expenses that were not eligible for reimbursement by either FEMA or the state coronavirus relief fund. So unreimbursable costs were 85,000. And I can't say quickly what all of that consisted of, but just to give you an example, if we had a service that cleaned our police vehicles, and we weren't able to show that there was somebody that was COVID positive riding in those vehicles, then that cleaning wouldn't qualify for reimbursement. So there were costs that were incurred that were not reimbursable. However, the coronavirus relief fund grant that we got this year for $234,000+, they told us that even if the costs didn't qualify for any of these direct COVID expenses, that they were going to allow us to use that money to reimburse our public safety expenses in general, even if they weren't tied into COVID. And that was just for the costs that were incurred between July 1st and December 31st. So I've got a total of about 104,000 between ineligible costs and excess grant proceeds that we can use to offset police time that didn't qualify for grant reimbursement. Ironically, a lot of police overtime that was incurred this year because of COVID, because of staff shortages, was getting charged to our COVID expense account, and it is included in that $360,000. So, make a long story short, is I expect the vast majority of that 360 will be earmarked for these funding sources. I would probably pull it out of the general fund so that it doesn't distort our general fund activity in fiscal 21 and show it in a special revenue fund. And any excess, if there is any, I can use to offset our police public safety expenses in general. So I think we're, long and short is I think we fared pretty well, at least on expenses on the town side. Now, granted, we still have a few months to go, so we will probably be incurring some additional COVID expenses, and we did have some expenses that were ineligible for those grants, so to speak. Which, frankly, if I could use any ARP funds to offset that, then I might be able to offset even more of our public safety expenses with the municipal coronavirus relief grant. So there's some moving parts here. Overall, I think we're in good shape, and I'm waiting for ARP guidance to see how far I can stretch this. So I don't know. That's probably a little convoluted, but if anybody's got any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Questions or comments? So this is just for general town government expenditures that we may seek to use ARP funds from that were not covered by other grants that we received for COVID.
Right.
And the Board of Ed, they gave us an update last month when we met with them, and they were expecting to spend about $200,000 out of their regular expenditures. So we may have a $200,000 there. Of course, we'll get more of an update, but hopefully next week from them. But so we've got about $300,000 so far. And would that be put into as revenue for this fiscal year that we're still in right now? And then it would allow it to lapse into surplus because we've already spent the money?
Again, I was anticipating moving the expenses that were reimbursable into a separate fund, so it doesn't distort our budget.
Okay.
All
right.
But
so that's the expenditure side. What about the revenue side? What about the offsets of lost revenue, especially with the pool? This is the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah. So again, I think Sean mentioned a little while ago that we're still waiting for further guidance on how you can determine that amount. But I'm certainly hopeful that and we looked at that a little bit at the last meeting about various departments, whether it's Park and Rec, pool, fine arts, senior center, they all lost significant amounts of revenue, and I'm hoping that we can earmark ARP funds to offset all of those. And I had those summarized last week. But until I get that guidance that we've been waiting for. So I think the highlights were the departments that I kind of focused in on as far as having revenue loss due to COVID. And then there's a total there, I think, Sean. This is a 2-year period as well. And you can see the totals there.
Is the total in the 2-year period the 873, or is it you have to add the two?
No, it's the two together.
All right, so about $1.4 million.
Yeah,
exactly.
Lost revenue that we think we can make a case for, and then about $300,000.
Keep in mind, part of that is the pool, which is a separate fund than from the general fund, but indirectly it's all connected because we subsidize the pool, so the better the pool does.
Yeah, the less subsidy.
Right. And I know that when I talked to Sandy today too, I know, Sandy, that was another part of your question, was these offsetting revenues and what mechanically we might be able to do as the ARP money comes in, and can we offset and apply that as revenue to the next year or reduce expenditures in some way. And as I think what we talked about earlier and sort of just alluded to, the pool fund does present an opportunity there too, because it is subsidized by the general fund, moving some money into the pool fund balance and increasing it from its usually really right around zero, frankly, in most years to maybe a $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 fund balance would have an effect of decreasing how much that we have to subsidize, even if we spread that over 3 or 4, 2 or 3 more years, and kind of decrease our reliance on that. So that's an option I think we should probably keep in mind.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. Other questions or comments regarding our expenditures and income that the ARP money may be able to cover? So we really won't know more until after May 11th. That's the expectation.
It is. I'm hoping it'll be before then, but I believe that's the deadline. The indications we're hearing is right around May 11th. They'll probably use.
That was my understanding too, Sean.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Comments? Yeah, Mr. Jinks, welcome. And
good evening, everybody. Sean, this question is kind of for you. I noticed that CCM is developing this committee to basically kind of help municipalities with their ARP fund decisions. And have you sort of been given an update as to when they might sort of be up and running, and when we can maybe access that advice, or how they may be sort of distributing that advice? Is it kind of one-to-one? Is it just kind of high-level guidance, or just if you can give us an update, that'd be great.
Sure. So the last communication we had on that, and I'm actually just pulling it up, see if I have the date in there. They were, again, also looking for the guidance to come down so that they could kind of aggregate and pull together the ideas and make a presentation. They're talking about a webinar and some other sort of generally distributed information for towns, and to compare notes and see what other towns are doing and getting ideas from each other. My understanding, I'm just going to see if I have the email here. Yeah, where they said they're likely have more information on, or hopefully before May 11th. And I believe, right, the advisory committee, I think it's going to be a combination. This can be a case by case if you want to kind of talk or present something to the committee and see what they think or kick around ideas. But I think my understanding at least is that they're going to be trying to pull together something of a package that are recommended best practices and recommended ideas kind of aggregated from everybody who submitted them. So again, I think it's still a work in progress. I know they just announced kind of who the committee members were going to be, the advisory committee. And otherwise, I think we just kind of still awaiting details for exactly how that's going to work out.
Okay, thanks.
any other questions regarding summary review of the COVID? All right, so what's next, Sean?
All right, so I think I will go to, well, maybe we can briefly I'll pull up the mill rate calculator again, maybe just to kind of show and talk through that very briefly, if that's helpful,
Sure.
or we can go right into personnel. Either way is fine with me.
Well, let's do the calculator first.
Okay.
We're waiting as long as possible for the.
Correct. All right. So hold on, that's the wrong one.
It's got it down to 0 now, right?
Yeah. That's right, I'm in the wrong.
Calculator, new numbers. It's federal numbers now.
Exactly. All right, I'm trying to close out of this. There we go. Too many Excel files open. There we go. There it is. All right, and share. Okay, so this is again just kind of as a refresher for everybody, and some of us were going through it for the first time last year. But as you'll recall from our last meeting, we talked about expenditure adjustments and then proposed revenue adjustments. And this time we did include the updated information from the state, again, with the caveat that that is not final. But the indications are that some of those pieces of the legislator's proposed budget would have the support of the governor's office, or some compromise budget will be hopefully closer in line to this than the governor's original proposed budget. So we are, for at least discussion purposes, we've put those new updated numbers from the state in. So that's actually, I think, Jim, correct me if that's just everything here in the yellow, I assume.
Yeah.
And so that comes with a total revenue adjustment of $1.1 million. Again, it's important to notice the increase and decreases. Positive and negative sometimes mean a little different than you may think. That's unfortunately necessary to for the way we have to sum these up in the calculator. But in short, again, expenditure increases in the case of the Board of Ed here, as you recall from the pension information last week, of $87,000 as an adjustment. General government decreases of $340,000. That does include the debt service changes from the refunding and the new debt service number. So important to remember that whether we count that as general government or just debt service as it shows up in a different line, we can always move it around. But for now, that's where it is because it's here as adjustments within the general government section. And then, there we go. The way this kind of flows through is that's an adjustment from in total of either expenditure decreases or revenue increases of $1.42 million over here. And just the way this calculator works is we have the current year mill rate, fiscal 21 of 33.22, the town manager's proposed budget mill rate of 35.12, which is a 1.9 mil increase. Currently, after that 1.4 million is adjusted, if nothing else changed and we adopted today, the mill rate would be 34.62 by this calculator. And then we have here the target mill rate. And I know we don't, target or back into mill rates, so to speak, but this is something that we often move around and say, if we wanted it to be 34.62, let me see here. Is that working? The remaining we need to cut. You kind of have to, this shows you what that assessment would be for the average taxpayer. And that's an increase of 1.4 mils. But further down, that would show that the remaining needed to cut to that target, because we are at that target, would be 0 mils. You'd be at that number you're targeting. So to the extent we've talked about trying to cut, a mil from the proposed increase, I was just putting some numbers in here. That would be, instead of a 1.9 mil increase, it would be a 0.95 mil increase if we were at 34.17, for instance. And again, this summarizes the adjustments being made, the remaining cuts that would need to be made in expenditures after the revenue adjustments, and then those that have already been made. And ultimately, you still have 1.27 million to go, which is worth 0.45 mils to bring down to your target. So I know I kind of went around this a couple ways, but that's how far we are from that particular mill rate of 34.17. So $1.2 million. In the past, we have kind of played with, whether we divide that up in a third and 2/3. Again, don't keep in mind the debt service is being accounted for as general government here. But if you did that, or if you move that out, this shows how far either the town or the Board of Ed would still need to go as we divide up that 1.2 million, so to speak, if in additional cuts. So just otherwise, this shows the budget at this point not reflecting any adjustments. I know it says that here. We can make these adjusted. This is at the moment just what our budgets were recommended at, and we can adjust this so people can see what the overall budget impact is. So I'm not sure if there's any questions. I'll stop sharing. I can always bring it back up, but.
So what you did was from the 1.9 essentially we've essentially taken care of a quarter of that mill rate increase by the adjustments that we talked about last week. All right.
That's right.
Okay. Councilman Velover, I see your hand up.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sean, question for you. And I know you talked about it at our last meeting, but I just want to go back to it. In those, in the pilot category, you had three things showing up yellow, and I just want to make sure I understand. So there was the pilot of 1 point whatever that you were zeroing out, the 1.317, and the college's pilot of another 100,000, which you're zeroing out. Now you said that 2.280 number includes those old numbers based on this the new tiered reimbursement pilot. Is that correct?
Right. They used to come in two different labels or accounts, if you will. And Jim can correct me if I have any of this wrong, but yes, that it's not uncommon, the state, when they make an adjustment like this, to kind of give you a whole new category, or they'll call it, for a while, if you remember, there was the municipal revenue sharing fund, and MERS or MRSF they had, and other funds that sometimes would change name budget to budget, and sometimes as the accountants or finance folks, like I was before, we'd have to kind of re-engineer where those accounts are going because they have new names. That's sort of what's happening here, at least in the way they summarized it. But in total, right, these two different accounts would cease to exist, being replaced by the new tiered, and the net, if you sum those all up, is
About 800,000.
861,928. So that's the net of those all combined. So yeah, it's basically just showing that to keep dollars for dollars, we're adding the new 2.2 million, and then you just zero out the other two.
Okay, so that's good. I mean, at least so the new tier system would give us 800,000 more than we would have under the old, potentially, assuming it all goes through and it all passes and it's all finalized. But there will be 800,000 more from the new tier system than under the old pilot system, potentially.
That's right. That's our assumption based on what we know today. And again, the council will have to figure out what assumptions to make and kind of where to get comfortable with that as we get closer to adoption.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments on the mill rate calculator, Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Borrowy. Sean, is it possible for you, since we're not killing trees to do it, can you send out kind of on a regular basis, post meetings, the updated mill rate calculator to all of us? You know, and maybe it's just mill rate calculator, you know, for 4/27, 21 or whatever. So we have a sense of which one we're working off of. But it gives us the ability to play around with numbers as well and see where we ultimately would like to land.
Definitely. Yep. I'll send that out after this meeting tonight, and yes, updates with each workshop we have from going forward.
Thank you.
Thank
Good.
you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Other questions or comments? All right. I guess we're ready to deal with personnel then. So
Okay.
bring that up.
All right. So let me just start by sharing one more spreadsheet. Let's see if I can get that here, which is the personnel summary, because I think I want to highlight a couple of just broad categories, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Drive to talk a little bit about or answer any questions the council may have on the patrol officer position. So 1 second as I load this. There it is. All right. All right, so hopefully you can see the spreadsheet here. And as I was just mentioning, so the categories, strictly speaking, the only brand new position really not existing in prior year budgets, or the last couple of year budgets, is the DPW groundskeeper position. So you'll see here in the way I've kind of shown this is what was in last year's budget versus this year. Savings and again, costs in parentheses, I know a little counterintuitive, but that's the, again, the increase in the amount that position is worth in salary in the budget. I do have farther over here in column I, estimated benefits, which we have a formula to include Social Security, FICA, Medicare, retirement, and an estimate for medical benefits. It will be important to keep that with a grain of salt because later, as we see some of these other categories, the position that is currently occupied where someone's retiring, many times they already have benefits. And so that's not an added cost of replacing that with another position that just has a different title. And sometimes it'll actually be a pickup. We often have people in recent years, certainly, that have, as we've talked about through negotiations, that decline medical insurance more often than not, I have to say, recently. So we might find that replacement positions are actually somewhat cheaper in an overall capacity. But again,
Sean,
go ahead.
where it's not a grain of salt,
Yep.
it's with the groundskeeper. So that in
That is a new-
fact,
Yep.
so that's really the only one where it's not technically a grain of salt. It's a bigger chunk of money.
It
Okay.
is the only qualifier, right? And same with these other two positions. I mean, make no mistake that if we didn't fund them in the last year, like these two frozen positions, the new benefits, would need to be added in, or are added in the budget, and again would come out if you didn't fund the position. So, but that being said, the roughly 18,000 that we budget assumes a 2-person medical plan. That's in this formula here. Again, if someone declines, then we're not going to pay that 18,000. If someone has a family plan, it's closer to 26, I think, or 27,000. So it's, it's a little bit of a moving target, and usually it kind of washes out a little bit. But yep, that's definitely for these first three. That is the cost of benefits for each position.
So just for my simple brain, could you just sum those together and give a total in column J, or put it in H, whatever it is, just so
These
just so
three
we
here.
know. Yep.
Yep, that's 82,905.
Okay.
Just for that.
No, I meant by line, by groundskeeper, by assistant assessor.
Oh, I thought you meant for the three again. Oh, I see.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm just,
Yep.
yeah. To me, it's all in is what it amounts to. It's really what we're dealing with.
Yeah, understood.
Right. And I know that was what the ask was the last time.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
there you go. And so again, just in terms of each position. So again, the new position, the groundskeeper, new to the budget. The other two, the assessor position, again, whether you call it assistant assessor or assessor, the assistant assessor is currently the acting assessor. That is valued here at 70,113. And then the patrol officer position, which we'll talk about just in a minute, base salary, plus the benefits I referenced, and I know Neil's memo references some other costs with bringing on a new officer. And then the other categories that we've talked about that I just wanted to make sure, you're aware of, but that I wouldn't personally classify as new positions. We have a retiring engineering operations manager. The budget contemplates changing that title and responsibility to an assistant town engineer position. That's actually a savings of 12,000 in the budget before you now. There is another change, the general services clerk position that was funded at 31,000. My budget eliminates that position. So again, there's no additional savings there, but these with an asterisk will be something I'll summarize here at the end in terms of department reorganizations. They kind of net out. Coordinator for economic development, previously the economic development coordinator, simply really a title change and a slight job description change that I'd be proposing to encompass also grant writing. We're anticipating that will also, though, be a pickup based on the difference between the starting salary and where the incumbent was of about $17,000. As part of this reorg that I've talked about before with the town manager's office, the current administrative assistant to the town manager would have been moving out to human resources, the new department, and a management specialist, a kind of a recent, probably graduate student entering into the sort of municipal management workforce would be that position that I've described before at 65,575 anticipated for this budget. So that is, again, a new position, but it's replacing and sitting in the same area as the person who's currently there, or who was currently there. And then again, I don't know if this really falls in the same category, but we've talked before about the public safety network administrator. And again, with the passing of Mike Winters, that position has just been pulled out of the union. And so while there is a difference here in the salary we've talked about before, there will be some overtime savings as well. But I did, just because we've talked about it, put it on this list, but I think it's sort of in a different category than these initial three. And then just a few others that don't really quite fit. The WPCD currently has a vacancy of a retirement as a clerk. There's a clerk typist position in the office at the water pollution control facility. That's valued at $25,000. It is still in the budget for now, just a point of note. And also, as I referenced before, in that reorg, these three positions I've kind of envisioned moving around and swapping some offices in town hall. So that's why they're all kind of part of the same initiative. Originally, this administrative assistant to the town manager position was going to move over to human resources in the proposed budget to be funded at $56,955. And that's something, again, as we get to this, maybe we can talk about this later and I'll give the chiefs a chance to talk. But this is a position that I think for the upcoming budget, we may be able to not fund for the existing position with an alternative proposal that I could give you in terms of moving a position from finance over to staff that new position. So I know there's a lot of things here, but maybe it's probably best to start with some of these initial new positions and the department heads that are here to talk about them. And then maybe I can answer more questions about the rest if that works for you, Dave, or however you want to.
Sure. Yep, that would be fine. Mr. Slocum.
Yeah, I just had a quick question because I just don't recollect what's going on in the assessor's office. I know we don't have an assessor now and we currently have an acting. Is the 70 a bump for the assistant and we're still going to have an assessor salary that we're going to be filling? Is that what's going on there, Sean?
Yeah, no. So yeah, it's a little confusing, but if you'll recall, right, historically we had three positions there, really four before that. Now it's, for the current year, been staffed with two people. The assistant assessor is still serving as the acting assessor. So from a budget to budget capacity, they've been by contract being paid at the assessor level while they're serving that role. So the net budget impact of adding an assessor is actually the added cost of the 70,000, because theoretically, if they come in, they would, the assistant assessor would go down.
I got you. Okay.
Assistant position.
So in other words, it's to bring back to the right size and what you have expected in that office is what it's going to cost.
Simply put, it's to go from two people back to three people, but
Gotcha.
who's in each role is a little confusing.
Thank you for that.
Yep. I guess up to you, David, but maybe there's questions for the chief or how you.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because the chief is here and the deputy chief. So why don't we let Chief drive? He had his 7-page memo that we all received a week or two ago and hopefully had a chance to look through, and it gave an explanation. I guess what I'll do, Chief, because we talked this afternoon about it, maybe I'll summarize what I think it is in layman's terms, which we are, and see if it's understanding. But you've rarely had the 47 officers that you've had budgeted on staff because of people leaving for various reasons and or out with injuries and whatnot. So you've very seldom had the statutory limit of people actually on. And if you were to add this other person, it would give us more people to be able to not have to get so low in the ranks that we have to pull out some of the specialists. Because quite frankly, I'm not happy that we have to pull out a resource officer from Dodd for a month and then pull out a resource officer from the high school for a month. I think that continuity is not good. Now, maybe during COVID, it's a little bit different, but I don't think that's the ideal situation. So if you need budgeted another person in order to be able to have the staff level that may not be staff of 48, even though you're authorized to 48, it may be 43, 44. We need to give you another person because it takes so long to get somebody else in through the academy and through the localized training and actually out on their own.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if I could, if this was another department that I was in charge of and I could, and again, I understand that there's always a hiring process that people have to go through no matter what the position is, unless you have an established hiring list that you can just call up. But again, just to reiterate, in addition to the lag time between the time we post a position, do the testing process, the interview process, the background investigation, the psychological exam, the polygraph exam, that in and of itself, I mean, we've had some good luck. We can turn that around in probably, 10 weeks if we really set our mind to it. Just because, a lot of that is done by outside entities, the testing and all that, is all done by outside organizations now. But then, the big thing obviously is the approximately 6 months worth of police academy training, followed now by 12 weeks of field training where the officer, you notice them on the street, they're in uniform, they're out responding to calls. The only difference is normally, anytime you see a Cheshire police cruiser with 2 officers in it, normally that's one training officer and one trainee officer. We don't run 2 officer cars, at any other time. But again, that's literally 9 months. You see from the memo, if you reference it, the 2 officers who are currently in field training were hired on September 10th of last year. They're not slated to finish their field training until July 12th. It's a long time. So the lag time there is really what slows us down. And again, as we had the discussion today, even if the council sees fit to reinstate the funding for the 48th officer, if I could find a certified officer to hire, that would be, that'd be great. I could probably make that happen, earlier. But as it stands right now, as fate would have it, the police academy class after July 1st is again September 10th of this year, Friday, September 10th. So again, we're right back to the same boat. If you authorize the funding for that position, that officer probably will not be ready to be on patrol by themselves until just after July 1st of next year, 2022. Now, the one thing that we didn't account for in that is if they don't start till September 10th, then the first year cost goes down by a little bit because instead of funding it for the full year, it'll only be funded for 10 months. The savings is probably minimal, but it's a little bit less. And look, the bottom line is, I don't want to say we're in crisis mode, but it's getting close from a hiring perspective. I shared with Mr. Borowey earlier today. Since the time I wrote this memo, I think probably concurrently with this meeting that we're having, the Southington Board of Police Commissioners is meeting, and they're approving the hiring of, I think, 4 new Southington police officers, including somebody who's currently a Cheshire police officer, another young officer who'll be leaving to go to for his own reasons to go up to Southington. And I spoke with Chief Daly from Southington yet would. Probably before the end of this weekend, I will have another 2-week notice. So we'll actually go down to 38 officers available for duty for a period of time. Before the 2 officers who are in field training now are done with their field training and can start patrolling by themselves, which again, I anticipate to be in the first half of July. So that again is problematic. If we have 48 officers and 5 leave, we have 43. We only have 47 and 5 leave, we're down to 42. And again, just I won't bore you with all the details, but there are provisions in the union contract about what happens when the patrol shifts get below a certain level. Basically, it's below 6 officers per shift, because a couple of things happen there. The patrol officers can't get any time off. They negotiated a way in years ago, before it's been in the contract since I've been here, a way so that people in non-patrol assignments can be temporarily reassigned to the patrol division to make up for that staffing shortage. And then, the other part of it is it governs how we can do that. But again, as Mr. Borowey pointed out, and I think as the memo makes clear, we've had to pull at one point, I think we had 3 specialty, actually this month, maybe we're only at 2 right now. But it, again, it's getting down to the point where, this is all being done on, our overtime exposure is getting up there. And look, eventually people just get tired of that. They get burned out, especially over the summer. If there are people with families, kids at home, and they can't get any time off, or they're, worst case scenario for them is that we're ordering them, we're contacting them halfway through their shift and ordering them to work a double shift. And again, understand that could be somebody who's came to work at 11 p.m. and is now being told that instead of going home at 7 a.m. they got to work all day. You can imagine that creates problems. There's childcare issues. There's just fatigue and burnout and everything else. And we're going to go, unfortunately, through the peak vacation period of the summer with in pretty dire straits. The detective sergeant has been pulled since the end of April when Sergeant O'Donnell retired. So one of the lieutenants is covering the detective sergeant position. And again, pulling these officers out of their specialty assignments affects their morale too. Those are the rules. Everybody accepts it, but it's still not an ideal way. And we're in a point now where, we've had to do this before on occasion for a month or 6 weeks if something cropped up. But now we're in the point of, the school resource officers that you mentioned, they help us out a little bit because they go back to patrol during the summer. So that gives us a little bit of relief. And again, as I pointed out in the memo, I have 2 people out on long-term injury right now. It's conceivable that both of them come back to work at some point, within the next, could be weeks or months. But again, as I shared with Mr. Borowee today, one of them is visiting a neck surgeon. He's got a serious neck injury. If he decides to have surgery, that's going to prolong the amount of time that he's going to be out of work. So, I can't. Sometimes you get somebody who goes out for a routine surgery and is told you're going to be on light duty you'll be home for 3 days and on light duty for 2 weeks, and then you're back. We had that happen a couple of weeks, or probably about 6 weeks ago, with somebody who just had to have a routine minor procedure. But the 2 who are out, one has a neck injury, and the other one has a serious concussion, still undergoing therapy and medical treatment as she recovers from a concussion. So I don't know when they're going to be back, to be perfectly frank with you. That's kind of the position that we're in right now. And, it hasn't been this, again, it's combined with this whole, that I know you probably read articles or see things on the news about other police departments having trouble hiring people, and people, nationally. This is not a local Cheshire problem. People don't want to get into police work right now. The atmosphere is very negative and all the rest of it. So, we've put out now a rolling application process for certified officers, meaning, there's no deadlines on it. If you're a certified officer, put an application in. We'll interview you, as long as we have a vacancy, obviously. We got one. I'm interviewing him on Monday. The deputy chief and 2 of the lieutenants interviewed him yesterday. Seems to be a pretty viable candidate. So, there's a possibility that we'll get one. And, when we do that and get a certified officer, it probably takes us 4 or 5 weeks worth of training rather than the 9 months that a new hire would go through. So conceivably, if we get that person through if I like him, and get him through the background investigation process, by mid-June, possibly we could have somebody at least working. And again, by mid-July, that person would be eligible to go out by themselves, as opposed to July of next year. So that's always an advantage. But, as you know from our previous conversations, people are leaving us to go to departments that have defined benefit plans still. This is a rarity. This is somebody who's leaving one of our larger urban departments in the state because that's not the kind of policing that he envisioned it to be, apparently. And wants to come and work in a smaller town. But nonetheless, he's leaving a place that has a defined benefit plan to come to us. So that would be a complete, would go completely against the trend that we've been experiencing. But at this point, I'm certainly going to give him an interview and every opportunity. So I'm sorry, I kind of rambled there a little bit, but it's a lot of information.
Yeah, that's right. Chief, if you would share with everybody one more fact that you told me. You are authorized up to 47 officers. And how many days have you had actually that many officers, let alone available for work? I think it was a handful.
Yeah, well, and it hasn't been in the last, if you look at the first page of the memo, when we went into the beginning of last year, we were already down 2 positions. There it is. So it's been, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, but it could be going on, it could be a full 2, maybe a little bit more than that. Probably 2, I think once since Sean has been here. So once in about 3 years. And it was literally, we got back to 48, and within weeks, we had an unexpected resignation. So it's been a while since we were actually at 48. Again, I just to point that out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Questions or comments regarding whether we want to support this item in the budget as recommended by the town manager? Went in the dark. See, you don't move around enough. Councilman Veliver.
Hi, thank you. Chief, just a quick question. I know you've hit on it, but if you could just emphasize again, how many officers do you currently have that are in active duty status? Of the number you have, how many are available, to actually go out and work on a day-to-day basis, not on military leave, not on medical leave, not in training? How many are actually, if you needed to call everybody in, how many would that be?
39.
39. Okay. All right.
And again, if you look at that's the highlighted number there. Now, if you go to the next one under that, I was, when I wrote this memo, probably about 5 weeks ago when I started working on it, I didn't know that the officer was going to be leaving for Southington before July 12th. So that number will actually, again, I anticipate getting a 2-week notice from him, maybe as soon as tomorrow. So that number will go to 38.
Okay. And then my question, you started getting into it and answering it, but my question was going to be to the issue of how, would it be helpful? And obviously it would be to recruit more certified officers, but it sounds like that's not as easy as it sounds. So, I guess, so that would be my concern, because it seems like if we could get some more of those certified officers, but it doesn't sound like a lot of them are jumping from where they are to want to come over to Cheshire for various reasons. One, you've already talked about, it's a defined benefit plan, but I assume that there probably are other issues as well. Are there certification issues if you had a police officer, let's say from another state like New York or Massachusetts or something like that? Is there a certification process where if you had an out-of-state officer who had been an experienced officer in a different state can come to Connecticut? Is there something that can be done there?
Yeah, it's called Comparative Certification, and basically they have to provide us, the hiring department, with all their training records from their out-of-state employment, which we then submit to the Police Officer Standards and Training Council. They do a review, and then what they come up with is a group of classes, and depending on where they're coming from. Like I've heard other departments of, if somebody comes from California or Washington State, for example, the training is largely consistent with what we do here. But sometimes you get somebody who comes up from a sheriff's department down south somewhere, and they've got to take 15 classes or something like that. So it does happen on occasion. There is a process, and again, it is more streamlined than hiring a new officer. It's very rare that somebody comes even from out of state as a certified police officer, and they have to go through the entire academy. So there is that possibility if we were so fortunate.
I was just curious. I mean, I see some of the issues that we're seeing in other states as far as maybe some of the fatigue some of these other officers are seeing in other states where they're having more, whether it's, societal or political issues in those states. And, you see you're hearing the reports of officers from like New York, especially New York City and other cities are, getting out, retiring. And I'm just wondering if some of those officers, obviously maybe they're interested in going from the big city to a town, or something like that. I was just curious how that would work as far as if you were looking to recruit people from other states or who were looking to get out of where they were, but maybe something more like a Cheshire, whether that was something that could work as well. So,
right. Again, we just to reiterate, and I'm sure most of you have heard this before, when we do most of our recruiting now is done on the internet. On the whole testing process, our recruiting process is done by a company called policeapp.com. And so when our reach is not now just an ad in the Cheshire Herald and the New Haven Register and like it was 30 years ago. Our reach is far and wide. We do on occasion get an inquiry, but I can't say that I've had an out-of-state applicant who's followed through on the process and actually applied. One other point I would just make, and I don't want to make it seem like we've had no success, because I think there's 4 officers now, right, Fred? I think there's 4 officers working now. 2 came from Wallingford, 2 came from Meriden, who were certified officers who came to Cheshire. Now, one of them predates me. The other 3 I hired, but one of them, before was hired before the change to the 401. But the last 2 certified officers we've hired are no longer with us either. One of them initially got completely out of police work, and one was a retired state trooper who decided that being a part-time officer in Prospect was more in line with his retirement plans than being a full-time officer with us. So it's been hit or miss, to be honest with you. So I think that makes 5 certified officers that I've hired. 3 of them are still with us, 2 of them are not. So.
All right. Well, thank you. I was just curious if there was marketing out of state that was possible as well. So.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Pavano, and then I saw Mr. Slocum.
Yes, Chief, just to make this simple to understand, you're saying that the cost of an officer with benefits is $87,081, but there are training costs. So what would the actual total package be with training costs and everything for a new officer?
Again, so $81,000 would include includes the tuition, uniforms, and equipment for the new officer. The real variable there, similar to what Sean was talking about with the other new position, is the level of education or military experience that a new hire has. But like every other personnel thing, other than salary, the big cost is, do they come in as one of the last officers we hired, she was 21 years old. She's going to be on her parents' insurance for another 5 years. So she costs us $0 for health care right now. Her classmate in the police academy was married and had a baby while he was in the police academy. So he's on the family plan. So he can cost us up to, $105,000, dollars there. A little bit of a variable as to whether they have, military experience or college education, but that's really the range. And that does include the initial uniform and equipment outlay, plus the $3,800 that the state charges us in tuition to send people to the academy in Meriden.
Thank you.
Mr. Slocum, you had?
Yes, I did. Thank you, David. Chief, on that list that you gave us, which is now down to 39 with the potential retiree, guy going to Southington, we still would have by October of next year, we'd be up to 43 officers, correct? And my question goes to this really. So if we had 43 at that point in time, which is 6 months from now, and we put out a notice to hire July 1, and they're not an officer coming from an existing department with 2 weeks notice, and we hire someone that's got to go to the academy, you're going to add a 44th officer next Christmas. Is that correct?
Well, again, if it was after July 1st and they were not a certified officer, it would be September 10th is when the next police academy class starts. So it would actually be July 1st of next year right around July 1st of next year before they'd be done with all their training.
Right. So we're really looking at a Christmas club plan. We're far out on these hires when you get right down to it, because they can't serve right away. Right. So this is sort of like advanced planning for next year's budget when you get right down to it, or the following year's budget, because it takes, well, not really, but it takes so long to get these people in.
Right.
And now, could you just, your sense of being able to bring in an officer who's already within another department is probably less than 50-50 just based on past experience. Is that accurate? Maybe less than 75%?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the deputy chief and the 2 lieutenants interviewed the guy yesterday and liked him enough to recommend that I give him a chief's interview, which is the step before we have to make a conditional hiring offer to them. So I'm confident that, again, assuming that this officer is not in a bunch of different hiring process, I'm confident that we can, he's a little bit older, already been working for a couple of years. So I'm confident that if we make him the offer, he'll come and work for us. But again, as I said, we put this certified officer recruitment notice out probably 6 weeks ago. And this is the first person we've got who's actually applied. So we're just not having a lot of success doing it.
But the net effect, say that person is hired, that still puts us with 43 officers in October.
Well, I think he would be 44.
Oh, he would be the 44th.
Yeah.
I assumed you had replaced. So he's replacing the Southington transferee.
Yeah, or one of the others who retired earlier this year.
Okay, so we'd be at 44 potentially in October. Okay, thank you.
And again, bear in mind, between now and then, if the injured officers come back to work, we could be as high as 46 in October, because those other 2 officers would come back to work.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. Other questions and comments? Mayor Orris, I welcome you. We are just beginning review of personnel. And the first one we're talking about is the chief and his memo, and we're comfortable with adding back the 48th officer in the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. My apologies to the group for being late. I had a business function I couldn't change. Thank you.
Yeah, we let everybody know. Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments for the chiefs so that we don't have to have them necessarily stay too long?
If I could just interject really quick, and Chief, I just forwarded you an email from Officer Morley. He just gave us his 2-week notice, so we're going to be officially down.
There you go. I guess that the Board of Commissioners meeting in Southington must have been quicker than our meeting here tonight.
Yeah. So, all right. One thing I would note is that in the patrol line item for salaries, you are underexpended by about $40,000. So, while we may need to add 80,000 for the position, you're underexpended because you've had the vacancies and whatnot. So I briefly mentioned this afternoon in preparation for this talk, is there a way that we can allow you to hire that you don't have to fully fund it, knowing that you're not going to have 48 officers? Maybe if you're comfortable with you having 44, 45, or 46, maybe we need to have 48 authorized in order to get the comfort level that we're at. So I don't know. We didn't really come to a conclusion. You simply said you're not going to hire him if the money's not there.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, so the way I look at it, and this is the way, Michael taught me to refer to it, is we're authorized for 48, but funded for 47. If we were fortunate enough, like, again, the pendulum swings back and all of a sudden everybody wants to be a police officer again, there's nothing, right, that stops me from talking to Sean and coming back to see you in December and saying, hey, look, we have an opportunity now to get back up to the 48. Based on where we are in the current fiscal year, can you make what it would be a supplemental appropriation authorizing me to hire the position for, it would only be 6 months at that point. Nothing would stop me from doing that. Again, the lead time here is the thing that puts us behind the 8 ball. Again, as I said, if you see your way fit to authorizing the position in the next fiscal year, the person doesn't hit the road in uniform to where they make a difference in our number of people available for duty until this time until July of next year. So.
Although we pay for them for 9 or 10 months of that. Right?
Yeah, that's it. We're paying them. They're on the payroll. So again, just so the people who are in various stages of training right now are current town employees getting paid their full amount, their full salary, as are the 2 injured officers with the offset for the workers' compensation part of it. So it's not like we only have 39 officers. We still have 45, but it's the available for duty part that puts us behind the 8 ball.
All right. Other questions or comments? Mr. Jenks?
Yeah, thank you, David. So, Chief, I just this is a very greenhorn question probably, but as far as the overtime goes, are we able to sort of temp hire officers to fill that time at all in Cheshire, from other municipalities in the area, rather than paying overtime, or is that something that wouldn't be allowed in the contract with the union? Or I'm just trying to think about it. The last time you were with us, I think you said that we were already kind of blowing through what was allocated for our for overtime. So it seems like we're destined to have a pretty large overtime bill by next October or whatever, when we're going to have more officers. So can you speak to what could be done to kind of mitigate those costs?
Yeah, that it would have to be negotiated with the union. The union contract makes it pretty clear that this is their work. So I don't. We have reciprocity agreements for extra duty, but that's all extra duty work that's paid by the outside vendors, and we get to go work other places. Other officers get to come and work here, but I also think, to be quite frank with you, the biggest hurdle that I see there is the liability issue. What happened? Would I let a Cheshire police officer go work a shift? And look, it's one thing if it's a mutual aid, there's an emergency or a planned event, you got to send somebody. We do that all the time, and it's accounted for in state statute. If I was to have another officer who I was, for example, if we were fully staffed and somebody said, hey, I can go take a couple of shifts a month in Southington because they're short staffed right now, I would have concerns about liability issues there. So they're a full-time Cheshire police officer certified by us. What happens if they go to Southington and get injured? What happens if they go to Southington and get into a critical incident and get sued or something like that? I'm not sure how comfortable I would be allowing somebody to do it. And I think my fellow chiefs would have that issue. And again, understanding that's if we could work something out with the union to where they would even allow that to happen.
So you're saying it's a really easy thing to do then?
Yeah. Look, as Mr. Bora, we just pointed out, we do, every time we have these positions not filled for any period of time, there's a payroll savings there, right? These were fully budgeted positions and they're not filled right now. So it's going to offset don't get too happy about that $40,000, Mr. Bora, because As I pointed out in the memo that was written at least 2 payrolls ago, the patrol division, which is where the brunt of this overtime happens, had just gone over its $285,000 allotment, and June is really the beginning of our peak vacation time. It really starts picking up in June, so we're not there yet. So we'll be significantly over in patrol division overtime. I'm hoping still to be able to make my budget number this year, just because of the number of vacancies we have leading up to all that payroll savings.
Okay, I guess that's somewhat comforting, but not so comforting.
Yeah, it's not. Look, short term, everybody likes the little extra money, right? If they could pick and choose, you'd work overtime in October and November so you could have a great Christmas, and then you'd work overtime in May and June so you could have a great summer vacation. But when it's becoming constant and it's almost, I can't tell you the last time we went through a full day without at least one of the patrol supervisors or officers being on overtime. It's been a while. And again, as I mentioned earlier, when it gets to the point where you're being ordered to work overtime as opposed to choosing when you're going to work it, that's when it becomes really burdensome on the officers, and I start to worry about fatigue and burnout and everything else.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions for the chief? Are we ready to move on to a review of some of the other? All right, let's move on. We also had that Public Works. Sean, if you could put that chart back up again, please. Yep. There we go. All right, groundskeeper. What if we were to not have this position and we were to have a spring and a summer temporary help? Would that cover a lot of what was needed here?
So I know George is here to answer
George,
just
yeah.
that question. So,
Sure.
George.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It's a great thought, Mr. Bory, but I tell you, we have a hard time getting summer help at this point. We typically hire 10, 12, 15, depending on, they don't all work the full summer, but especially early in the season, April 1st onward, April 1st to May 15th, and then probably September into the end of September into October a little bit. Those are kind of some of the hot times, and the college kids are back in school generally, and anybody you get, you've got to train up, and you tend not to get them back the next year, which is just a loss, honestly. So I wish we could do it with that, but I'm not really confident that would be a one-for-one trade-off.
Okay. Other questions or comments regarding that? We'll just go down the list, see what your thoughts are, everybody. Mr. Orris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bory. Thank you, George, for being here, and the chiefs as well. And I see Gina and Jim as usual. Thank you all for being here tonight. George, what would be, well, I guess the first question I'd ask is, what do you expect for retirements? I'm just curious, as we have some of the more senior people, if they are retiring in this fiscal budget, and we did consider implementing this new job, what would be the fiscal impacts to the department? Would you be rehiring some of those retired positions at lower salaries, and where would it all fall out in terms of, compared to your current budget?
Sure, good question. And as far as the groundskeepers go, they're other than the crew leader, they're pretty young in the system. But we did have 3 retirees at this point, and Sean took a credit in the Public Works budget of, I think, $30,000, anticipating those retirements and hiring folks at, like you said, a lower rate and lower seniority level, all that stuff.
So the net effect, I guess, would be about a $30,000 increase over last year's budget?
A decrease.
If we wanted to hire this position?
Oh, I got you. Correct. You could probably take 30,000 off that number. That's 84,000 with benefits.
I'm sorry, was it 80? I thought it was 60
Yeah.
something.
It's 60 in salary. We have the added benefits, FICA and 401k and medical estimates that would bring that higher up to this additional 26,000. I will say, and I was checking earlier today, those folks that are retiring, I believe if I confirm the list, but we're all currently had town funded medical benefits. And so there's a chance that a new position, a lot of our new hires coming out, I was saying this earlier in the meeting, have declined. Again, you can't guarantee on it. It's hard to budget for it, but we have a lot of people that decline insurance depending on who they are, if they can be on their parents' plan or whatever. So it's also possible you could pick up some savings in addition to that we budgeted for the salary savings from the retirements, but also in the lack of, if one or even two of those new people don't take benefits, we could save additional money.
But assuming apples to apples with those benefits you're talking about, we're talking about a plus 50,000 roughly.
That's about right. Yep.
Over last year's budget, if we wanted to implement this new position, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And the only other thing I can say is that we could certainly reduce the temporary part-time at that point. There's some savings there. It's not going to get you to 50,000 obviously, but if we got rid of 2 or 3 of the summer help, that might be 10, 12,000, somewhere in that range, I would say.
Well, at least from my perspective, George, I'm looking really, really hard at any new positions or frozen positions that we may want to re-implement because I'm concerned about the impacts to the taxpayers with the mill rate. So anything that you have that you can show us as a council to kind of offset some of these increased expenses would be helpful, because it's going to impact my decision. What I will say, and I'm happy to say it publicly, is, we've done a great job of funding a lot of new facilities, whether it be the tennis courts, the pickleball courts, the basketball courts. We've improved a bunch of fields. And I think we're all really proud of that. The community has seen it, and it's been well received. But for me, the maintenance needs to follow that. And when you make a sizable capital investment, you need to make sure you follow it with proper maintenance. Otherwise, you're spending good money after bad. And so, for me, this is a position, at least from the people that I've talked to, and George, maybe you can illuminate a little further. I know that your crew is stretched a bit with the way they currently are. And I think my concern is that's going to be exacerbated with the new investments we've made and the expectations of us and the public to maintain them properly. So, I'm really looking closely at this position and trying to find a way to implement it, to help. But obviously, we've got to do it in as cost-effective manner as we can. So I'd ask you to really kind of dive in deep and see how we can come up with a way to maybe support this position. And again, I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the rest of the council. I don't know where everyone else stands. But for me, I think, I'd like to know more about this spot. Sorry if I was long-winded.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Orris. Mr. Slocum.
Yeah, Mr. Jinks had his hand up too. So Jim,
great.
if you were up first, I'm not
I
really
didn't-
sure, but go ahead, whoever.
I don't know. Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree with what Rob just said, as far as, obviously we have expanded we have updated and kind of expanded our facilities. So it is very important that we maintain those. And I do think that the public has really appreciated all these improvements we've made. I also think that, we've talked a bit about, or Park and Rec has talked a bit about, wanting to improve the fields of the schools and use those, perhaps use those more fully, as we have a lot of demand for our fields and parks from all the different leagues and sports we have. So that would also point to, if we're going to do that work, then that's going to need more maintenance as well. So, so I'm, as Rob said, I think it'd be really important for us to see anything, George, that you can show us as far as any kind of offsets, or how we can kind of afford this additional position. That would be great to see.
Sure. And if I could speak to both those comments a minute, I'll try to give you my thoughts a little bit, but I don't want to take away from anybody. But yeah, and I agree. We want to. We only have proposed this after as I said earlier, exhausting all opportunities in my initial briefing. We've really tried to swing maintainers into the groundskeeper side and vice versa, and make it work. And it works, but we're kind of, I could see that we're losing ground. We're not gaining, certainly, and at times we're holding our own, and at times we're losing. And I don't want to go through all the metrics and rehash my presentation, but I'll just say, Mr. Orris and Mr. Jinks both just said, we've taken on some more enhancements or built more infrastructure since long ago. And I went back into the 2003-4 budget 17, 18 years ago, and there were four groundskeepers in that budget back then, and there's a foreman at that time. But at that time, we had 3 miles of trail. Now we have 7.75 miles of trail. Along with that trail came 2 new parking lots. Along with that trail came 4 new bathrooms. Bartlam Park South, the old Chapman property, didn't exist back then as a town entity or a town trail. Open space properties, we didn't have Fen Road. Dime Savings wasn't ours back then with a parking lot, as it will have. The dog park wasn't here then. The upcoming Railroad Avenue parking area wasn't here then. McNamara was maintained by volunteers back then. Now we're being asked to take on the full maintenance of McNamara Field, which we're happy to do. But again, that was never envisioned back in those days as being a full-time groundskeeper job. So, and there's more and more and more, and I won't burden you with all those details, but we certainly have, I'll try to show you all the cost savings or as much as we can pay forward to that as we can. But sometimes it's just an added cost because we've taken on more infrastructure. And I hate to be the one, I know the council recognizes that, but I hate to be the one to have to bring that up. But it's just, there's just a lot to do and not a lot of people to do it.
Mr. Orris, and then we'll go to Mr.
Yeah, sorry, Don, to jump in, but George, thank you for that. And you don't need to take the burden of that. I certainly recognize the greater amount of work that you're all doing. I think we're trying to hold everybody to a higher standard. I think the public, not that everyone hasn't done it as best they can, but we've invested heavily into a lot of these facilities. And in any investment you make, whether it be in your home or your business or anything else, you need to follow it with proper maintenance. Otherwise, why make that big capital investment if you're not going to support it properly? Change the oil in your car after you buy a nice new car appropriately. You got to do all the appropriate maintenance to follow with it. So, I recognize you're doing more work. I also recognize the fact that we're using stuff more. The pandemic has shown us a lot that people are getting outdoors more. I think that's going to continue. I think that's great. I can see that we're more proud of the facilities that we have now with the tennis courts, the basketball courts, and the fields. And I think that's a great thing. So I think we need to continue along the path of trying to support that and properly maintain it. Again, as fiscally appropriate as we can, but nonetheless, we need to give you the support. So, I'm open-minded to this position, obviously with a little more thoughtfulness from you and input as to how we can minimize the total impact financially. But thank you, George.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Orris. Mr. Slocum, I called on you, and then we'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Yeah. Thank you. George, you did a great job of laying out the answers to some of my questions, because the bottom line is I know stuff has not been done or as completely as you would like to have seen it done. But as you talked about that, you mentioned maybe a savings of cutting out a couple of high school kids or college kids to do some of the work. And it seems to me that if that's a legitimate consideration, I think that might be a little short-sighted, and I think the council must need to be aware of that, because the bottom line is you don't want to add a person and stay still. And I'm not sure you painted that picture, but it sounds like what you're saying is you're getting all the work done, but you're far enough behind that it's a struggle. And if you bring it up to complement, you should be able to do maybe more or a better job at all of it. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I know there's stuff that gets undone in town. It doesn't get looked at. There's stuff in our parks that are walking parks. They're not necessarily, Bartlam Park and Cheshire Park. There are other things that need management. And I know the town, relies on volunteers for some of that and some of the open spaces and stuff. But again, some of it is stuff that does require work. And I'd be concerned if you get rid of some of those college kids as a defense of hiring this other position. That might be short-sighted. So I'm not sure I'd like to see that as a demonstrated savings unless it really was one you thought you could live without and do more than 4 workers are doing now. In other words, I'd like to see more done than just getting even with what you just described as what you're not doing well. I would like to see you get more out of the workload. Maybe that's unfair based on what you described as having to do, but that's sort of the way I was looking at this. I don't know if you want to answer that, if that's a way to answer it or what.
Sure. No, we certainly, we can always do more, and we're happy to do it. And Cheshire has, we have to align our expectations with our staffing level, obviously. And Cheshire has high expectations. It's one of the best towns to live in the country, and there's a good reason for that. And folks that live here have high expectations, and frankly, we wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't want to work in a town with low expectations. I can tell you that, because there's not a lot of pride there, to be honest,
right.
on the resident side or the workforce's side. But we have to, to do what our expectations are as a public works department, as a branch of the town government. We'd like to do more. We'd like to showcase things a little bit better than we are. And as I said, we're treading water right now. So we'd like to get into the open spaces, as you said, Mr. Slocum, and cut down trees and make sure there's no hazardous trees and all that kind of stuff, instead of just kind of blitzing through there once in a while and taking out what we can, and sprucing up the parks more, and getting ahead of some of the maintenance instead of just kind of running up to Fridays and at the last minute and trying to get fields aligned and all that kind of stuff. And being more responsive to the sports groups and others who use those facilities. So not to mention the public buildings, the town hall, there's high expectations for the town hall. It used to look like a real, it was very well maintained, and it's maintained satisfactorily now on the outside, but it's certainly not the show place that it was at one time when there were just more man hours to dedicate to it. So it's things like that we'd like to get ahead of, and it increases the pride of everybody involved. So I'm kind of, I make those those offers to do things like we're looking in the couch for spare change, and that's what I'm trying to do to sell this to you. But as many part-time folks as we can keep, we'd love to, and I can assure you we'll put them to good use, whatever we get, and whatever. I know this is a difficult decision for the council, so I wouldn't want to be in your shoes either, but
well, I just don't want to see unrealistic, I don't want you to see justifying this position, for example, by saying you were just able to get rid of 3 kids, if in fact they're providing an important, valuable service at a lower price.
Sure.
That's all I meant. I mean, I don't want you coming back and say, well, we just cut off $12,000 to this expense this year because we're not going to have the same number of college kids working around town. But that's it. That's all. Just a comment. Thank you much.
If I could maybe just jump on that really quick in answer to that question a little bit, we are really talking about different levels of service and availability, because one thing and through the partnership with John Golick, I know George and John have worked really closely on planning, and George just said a couple of times about getting ahead of things. That also speaks to getting ahead of things seasonally. We found areas where we can do winter work or November work to prep fields, ball fields, diamond fields, so that when that really nice weather comes, like the beginning of April, like we just had, there's a few touch-ups and then they're ready to go. And some of that work happens in the off season, in the shoulder seasons, when you don't have snow, maybe till late December, if you're lucky. Having those folks available, having this position available, would really help bolster that ability to, be proactive, and then to have these great assets available to people so much sooner than trying to start that work at the end of March.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, folks. Mr. Walsh, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. George, first of all, I want to first say thank you for taking pride in your job and what this town looks like, and you and your crew have done a tremendous job with what you have. And we have some beautiful parks in Mixville and Bartlett and Cheshire Park, um, and Quinnipiac Park. I mean, we have some beautiful parks, and I know it takes a lot of maintenance to do. And I have to agree with Mr. Slocum. We don't want to cut someplace just to add another position if it's going to keep us at status quo. If we're adding this position, I would hope that we'd step it up a little bit. My question is how much, because if we didn't have this position, the work that this person would be doing would be done by maintainers or whatever, and would it increase your overtime allotment in that, or will things just not get done?
Yeah, it would, we have an overtime account for the grounds, and we certainly would make use of that if this position wasn't authorized. And we have, and we try to slide maintainers around as we can. Unfortunately, it's a great thought, and it works out sometimes. I can't say it doesn't work every time, but the busy seasons, if you will, are often the same on the highway side as they are on the ground side. So in the spring, we're out, we're street sweeping right now, we're catch basin cleaning, we're repairing catch basins all over town. So we've got all these maintainers running around doing that. And at the same time, the grounds, we're trying to get the fields prepped and lined and mowed sometimes twice a week, as we all know how the grass grows this time of year, and everything else. Picking up trash cans. We counted up one of the trash cans on one of the groundskeeper's routes the other day, just for grins, and I think it was 64 trash cans on his route between Mixville Park, a bunch of the trail. That's one person, and they don't have to be emptied every day, but if they're emptied 2 or 3 times a week, it's a significant amount of time to go to all those cans and take care of them and everything. So I try to equate it to times to mowing grass or something, which happens a lot, but there's a lot of things in between there that have to be done that are kind of behind the scenes, if you will. So that's a long answer to a short question. Sorry for that.
Thanks, George. I appreciate it.
All right. Other questions or comments regarding the Public Works position? All right. Can we see up again, Sean?
Yeah, couldn't unmute myself. All right, so again, back in the category, and then for those that maybe missed the initial summary of this, kind of broken these down by new position, which we just discovered, the brand new to the budget, the 2 positions that we froze in the last budget, but were funded in fiscal 20. And as we obviously have covered, the police officer position. So I guess the other position probably to go to would be the assessor position. Again, a little confusing in that right now we had the assessor position itself become vacant last year, but understanding that the assistant was going to step into that on an acting role, and that comes with a budgetary impact due to the union contract. That's why this $70,000 amount is different than the, I believe, $80,000 or $82,000 salary that's budget, $84,000, I think it is. And so, certainly I know Jim can touch on this a little bit or answer some questions, but we have had some internal discussions about options here with this position for the upcoming fiscal year, maybe some ideas that we could throw out to the council. And so, I'm certainly happy to do that now or answer any questions on it, or I don't know how you want to go forward, Dave.
Well, explain to me again now in the assessor's office, you have had 2 people for this current fiscal year working.
Yeah, ever since the unfortunate passing of our assessor last early spring, the positions remained vacant since really they were out on medical leave in January and February as well. So really going on almost a year and a half. The office historically had, I think at its peak, probably 4 positions there. Jim, I'm not sure. In my time here, there was a swing position when I first started that we eliminated between tax and assessor. It's been 3 historically in recent years. The assessor, an assistant assessor, and then an assessment technician. And presently we've had the assistant assessor and the assessment technician for the last year and a half. Does that cover it,
Right,
Jim?
so
Yeah, and if we could just add, Sean, you know, for a long time, pretty much, you know, I've been here over 20 years now, and they, you know, that was staffed with four personnel. But it's not just that, but you know, we had an assessor with you know, 20 years of experience. We had a deputy assessor with I think over 25 years of experience. And we had a staff person that had well over a decade of experience. And right now we've got an interim assessor that's got over a decade of experience, probably quite a bit more, maybe 15 years or more. And a staff person that just started maybe a year or two ago. So that interim assessor has been handling, you know, the tailwinds of a lot of turnover in that office, the tailwinds from our 2018 valuation process, including a lot of the court cases that you've been getting funneled to the council over the last year. I know they've both been working a lot of overtime. And I can't argue. There's peaks and valleys in that office. There's time, you know, like when personal property declarations are due, and they've got a month to get 1,000 of them reviewed and filed and assessed. So you know, I can't say that they're working overtime every week of the year, but then there's times when they're frantically working evenings and weekends to try to catch up. And I know there were times where they were even there Saturdays and Sundays. The overtime for the current staff person is getting charged to the overtime account. The interim assessor position probably has a even greater amount dollar-wise of overtime, but it doesn't get, you don't see that because it's just getting absorbed into her salary. She's on a salary. You know, my sense is that I worry about mistakes, especially when you know, you're in a crunch trying to meet a deadline. You know, my sense is that you probably have to take shortcuts. You know, as far as going out and looking for you know, things that aren't getting assessed or assessed properly. You know, I certainly sense that it's been a struggle, especially with the limited you know, seasoned personnel in that office. Although they've both stepped up a lot, and I want to, you know, kudos to them. They really put their best foot forward trying to keep that operation rolling. And I can tell you they're both very dedicated to doing a good job. But I do think they need help, and I don't know what the answer is. Sean and I talked about maybe suggesting a part-time position, and maybe see how that works out in the short term. You know, we're probably still a couple of years away from our next valuation process. You know, we could maybe see how that works out in the short term. But I do think that they're struggling to keep up with the workload there now.
But just to continue my question, you've requested, we've had two people, but you've requested for the budget to bring it up to 3.
Right, that's what's in the town manager recommended budget.
Right. So that's what you're recommending, but then you're just alluding to maybe you don't know if you could also do part-time.
Well, you know,
or instead of this, if we choose not to do this.
Said it a minute ago that you know, they were able to meet their deadlines, and they got a, you know, grand list growth, and I think they did an excellent job with just the two of them. but they did, I could tell you they were strained and stressed out for, weeks on end for certain periods in the fall and in the winter, trying to meet those deadlines. And I know we have asked for a full position there, but just maybe as a thought, to see if, even if we filled it with a half a position, and see how that works out over the next year or two. And if it does, maybe we could just leave it at that. I don't know.
Well, one thing we had mentioned before that, and I think Chairman Orris had asked, for any items that can kind of pay for themselves, or there's other additional revenue that could come in. And one thing that we know is if we did have a part-time position in there that freed up the assessor, the acting assessor now, to be out in the field a little more and try to do some, finding some of those properties that have improvements or things that maybe haven't been declared properly. We've run some numbers, and again, it'd be hard to. We were trying to figure out if that would justify, again, the full cost of an assessor. Maybe reach to say we'd add that much in value, but it's certainly possible. And again, it's really hard to quantify. But I'm confident that there are improvements and additions and items out there that weren't properly permitted and that weren't properly assessed. Therefore, that if we can get those on, in fairness to all the other taxpayers who are following the rules, that we could generate enough money within the ballpark of a part-time position that might kind of pay for itself. Maybe easier to commit to that than a full assessor position. So food for thought that I think if we can get the assessor out of the office, because right now the two of them are in the office almost, if somebody's on vacation, you only literally have one person. So hard to get out of the office.
Yeah, and I've even had times where there's been nobody in the office and had to cover just on, not that happens very often, but.
Yeah. Right, Mr. Slocum?
I know you guys sound like you're begging for a position here, but the bottom line here is, I don't think it was the intention of the council. I'll speak for myself anyway. When the assessor passed away, which was sudden and awful, we were in the beginning of last year's budget process. We were in the beginning of a pandemic. I think the reality of the situation was we had someone who was going to be acting, and the office had, I didn't know they just had one more. I don't remember that. But the bottom line is, I, for one, don't think, an office that really was functioning efficiently and well with 3 people, including an assessor, should be expected. I don't even know if you want the acting assessor to be the assessor. Now, that's probably a conversation for executive session, and I shouldn't have said that in public, but the bottom line is, you hired an assessor as a special, RFP and everything else and all that other good stuff. So I'm not sure that we should be looking for a reorganization of a department of 2. I guess that's what it comes down to. I'm speaking for myself. I just don't know how the council feels about it. But I'd be concerned about hiring a part-timer just to, keep an even keel on a stressed department, potentially, even with some downtime. How do you cover that department when there's vacations?
All right. Mr. Jenks.
Yeah, thank you, David. So, Sean, just go back to what you were just saying about you guys ran some numbers and you were trying to determine if the position could be paid for. Did you come up with, how much of the position could be paid for by the additional time of going out and looking for more property to be assessed? Just sort of an estimate, obviously. I don't think you said that.
No, and I can pull that. If you give me a minute, I could probably try to pull some of the numbers we were running. But we were looking at how much you'd have to add in assessed value, Jim, maybe off the top of your head, in terms of justifying what revenue. I can back into the number real quick here, but I think it's easier if you're talking about a $25,000 part-time position. And again, just to go back to what Mr. Slocum said, I fully support, and that's why my recommended budget was to restore the full 3 full-time positions. So I do stand by that. I'm just we're at that point where we're also trying to find savings and knowing that there's a lower mill rate we're targeting. So we're trying to find creative solutions that maybe get us on the road back to the full staffing. But Jim, I don't know if you have that handy.
Yeah, I think that was well said. Sean, I don't have that handy, but you know, I can't say that a full-time position could be easily covered by, you know, additional assessments.
Sure.
I think that would certainly be a stretch. And even with overtime, you know, that there's going to be a certain amount of overtime in that office, no matter how many people we have in it, because of the peak times are going to demand, you know, overtime at certain times. But it, you know, it certainly would probably reduce the overtime required by a significant amount. And you know, just crunching numbers, and it's really hard to, you know, determine, you know, how much by going out in the field and trying to track down new properties. It's probably not something you can easily quantify, other than to say that, you know,
Okay.
I would surely surely mitigate, you know, the cost. And I could probably try to come back with you something, you know, more definitive than that, you know, maybe like a range or something like that. And I'd be happy to do
Yeah,
that.
I was, yeah, I understand how difficult it can be. It sounded like Sean was going down that track and going to give us a number,
Yeah.
and then it didn't say it. So I was just
Yeah,
curious
no, I
if
mean,
there was just,
we had worked
if there was a
on some
number that was
numbers,
there,
but,
I'd like to know.
you
Well,
know,
just simply,
yeah.
yeah, maybe simply put, right? If, I mean, just taking our current mill rate at 33.22, right? If you added $1 million worth of value, so if you found, you know, 20,000 here and 80,000, and again, maybe that's ambitious as Jim said, but that would generate $33,220 worth of revenue.
Right.
And if a part-time position's $33,000 or $25,000, you know, so somewhere on the order of magnitude, I don't think it's impossible that you could find, you know, $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 in a year of, especially if you haven't been out looking for a couple of years. I mean, there's been a lot of improvements. There's been a lot of, I'm sure, some properties that haven't been inspected closely, or some that haven't had permits pulled. But yeah, maybe that's a high number, but I think it certainly could justify probably half of the cost or some measurable amount of a part-time position versus a scenario where we don't have those folks able to get out of the office very often. And again, I mean, Chris was out, I know a couple of weeks she was out doing some inspections. So it's not that it's not happening, but I think, you know, that would be part of the argument that you can generate more revenue if you have a more accurate list.
Oh, and chase after some of the business and some of the other forms that get filled out that maybe aren't as thorough. And some municipalities do farm that out to auditors and people that would be looking at them as well. This would be internalizing doing that. So I would support a position here, but I would like to see some offsetting, because I don't know that that's realistic, but I could see that this would have some offsetting revenue to it, and I'd like to see it on both sides then. Mr. Orris. Oh, can't hear you yet.
You're muted, Rob.
There you go. Oh, you muted yourself back. There you went back to mute. You're still on mute, Rob.
Okay, there you go. My apologies. Yeah, I was muted. Sorry, guys. I saw something pop up, and I think someone was telling me to unmute. My apologies. But what I was saying is I'm troubled a little bit with the idea that, you know, we're going to go out like police trying to find, you know, more assessed property. I think the bigger issue for me is, you know, what staff serves this department properly so they can do the work the way they're supposed to do it. And if what you're saying, Sean, is that the way it's currently staffed, they're just not able to get out and do the things that we would expect them to do. And as a result of that, we're probably losing some property that needs to be assessed and put on the tax rolls that's not on there. If that's what you're saying, then I think that's a conversation to support why we need more staff. but I don't want to leave the public with the impression that, we're trying to offset the cost of staffing properly by sending people out into the community, like police officers trying to catch someone and say, I got you. You just put that shed in and now we're going to hit you with an assessment because we got to offset the cost of that department individual we just added. And so I want to be clear on that. To me, it's about staffing the department properly. And if you think they're understaffed, then that's a conversation that we need to have. When I talk about paying for a position, it's really more, okay, we'll save $20,000 in overtime because now we've got a full-time position where we're not going to need that overtime. That's a conversation I like to have. But, I'm not looking to have less service provided to the community, or we've got to go out like the police, as I just suggested, trying to beat up our taxpayers for more revenue just because, we're trying to add a position. So I just want to be clear where I'm thinking of on that position.
Yeah, and I think that's a good clarification. I'm not implying that that's what we would do, but it is part of the normal course of what an assessor would do if we had the full-time assessor position. So I was really kind of maybe explaining what we do if we were fully and appropriately staffed, that I think that's one of the things that's had to go because the nuts and bolts in the office have been prioritized. But that's a good point. I'm glad you made that.
Yeah, so the point is that they're doing the best they can with the staff they have, but ideally, they need more staff to do the job the way we would want to do it.
Correct. Yep, that's right.
I like that way of wording it. Mr. Slocum?
Well, actually, I think that brings me back to where I started, which was simply, what did the department cost us when there were 3 people in it? What did the assessor being paid full-time, the deputy and the 3, they had a price it carried. You may have to get back to us on that. We're basically, we've had some overtime. We've had to come up to the price to sort of meet the market, with the assistant assessor being the acting assessor. But the bottom line is, this is really an increase. This is just potentially moving us from, what was basically a normal operation with 3 people, back to its normal position. To me, this is the least controversial of anything we're thinking about. And if you want to put $1 to it for the next meeting, I think that's useful for me. But this is just not a shocking request for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can answer that pretty much with, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, from where we were 2 years ago, that $70,000 difference is the difference between what it used to cost, what it costs this year, and then what we're asking for the next year. So
I think that's fair to say.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Varley?
Yes, Ms. Nichols, please.
No, I agree with Mr. Slocum, and now with Sean. What I was going to say is, it seems so simple. 3 years ago or 5 years ago, we had 4 people. We reduced it to 3. We now have 2. At the same time, the town is growing and we're having an increased grand list and a lot of other things to do. Doesn't make sense to me to not fund this position to 3 people. It brings it back to what we were doing 2 years ago. We're not increasing any additional things. We're just trying to keep what we have functioning to its optimal level. And to have 2 people in an office with the potential of having one person out and on vacation and having the office empty doesn't seem reasonable. And I agree with Tim. This one seems to be a pretty easy decision to me. This office should function at its optimal level. And that, in my mind, is 3 full-time people.
Mr. Walsh? Thank you, Ms. Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious, the assessor who passed away last year, what was their salary at the time? Because you're putting 70,000 now. Was that quite a bit higher based on experience?
I think it was 84,000. Is that right, Jim? Off the top of my head, I can look back.
Yeah, I want to double check it, but it was in that mid-80s, I recall. It might have been 86.
Yeah, so, and which is the request in this budget, I believe, also at 84. And the reason there's the 70,000, again, I know it's a little confusing, but it's because the acting assessor by contract is serving in that role and having to be, and therefore has to be paid at a level under the contract of what the assessor, they're in charge of the office, they're making the hours, they're signing the payroll, they're doing all of that, those functions. So there is a additional pay that comes along with that acting role. So that's why the budgetary difference in restoring that position and having 3 again is really almost like we're replacing the assistant assessor. They haven't.
Okay. That's what I was- All right, thank you.
All right. I would remind everybody a more global concept here. And, we're getting into a lot of minutia and kind of churning with a lot of little stuff in terms of a $110 million budget. But I would remind us all that what we want to do is not necessarily all the little details here in ad nauseum, but we've got to remember the overarching thought that 1.9 mils was higher than the community was prepared for, we would accept. And therefore we're looking at, we found a good sum of that, a quarter of the difference last week with some revenues enhancements and whatnot. Tonight we're looking at some of the expenditures. So each one by themselves in their own little world can be justified, but putting everything all together is going to result in a mill rate that we will not accept, I'm sure, as a council. So we do have to look at some of these, and it may not be all of these could go through. And all of this is, I think it was $200,000. I looked at the total. Not significant in terms of absolute dollars that would move the mill rate, but it is important for us to do our job looking at all of these. But at the same time, we've got to recognize that while we say yes to everything, when we finally get done with it all, it isn't going to be yes to everything. So
I haven't said yes to anything.
Well,
Just so you know, I probably said the most, I probably, David, said yes to the assessor's office.
Right.
Okay, because I didn't think we were voting about anything. We're just talking it out. Yes, we gotta distill this down, but none of
Yes,
these meetings have been decision makers for me.
No, although last week was helpful because we had a lot of revenues in there and we sort of bought in.
Absolutely,
on
absolutely.
that was good. And I thought we would sort of go in with, we're leaving a lot of questions left for next week, but sooner or later, and sooner rather than later, we are going to have to decide what we want to put together as a piece. And it will include some reductions from the requested expenditures, whether they're in these personnel or whether they're other areas. We still didn't get much into public works, but there was a line item in public works that was for materials that we talked about, one of the workshops for when we were with George in his department that was traditionally underspent. And I think we need to look at that as well, that we may not want to fund it to the 100,000 when we've traditionally spent 60 or 70,000 for materials. So there are other items that we need to continue looking at to try to chip away at the expenditure so that we're carefully watching the tax dollars. Mr. Orks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Barry. But Dave, you raise a good point, and I was going to make a similar point. I'm not agreeing to anything at the moment either, like a lot of the other council members are. We're probing, asking questions, giving some input, but at the end of the day, we've got a big decision to make. And from what I see, last week, and I might have missed some stuff earlier in the meeting, I apologize, but we were a little over $1.4 million in kind of found additional revenue and some cost savings in certain places. And we've got a $5.3 million increase request. So for me, we got a long way to go. So, we may all slice and dice personally the things that we think are appropriate that we should support. But for me, at the end of the day, with my vote, I'm going to be looking at Sean and Arnett and the staff members to say, okay, this is really where I see the community can afford in terms of a mill rate increase, if at all. And how we get there is going to partly be where we decide. But, at some point, we may have to get to a point where we say, Sean, here's the money you got. Go figure it out. And so, I'm not sure when we're going to get to that point, but I think we got a long way to go yet. And yeah, we've talked about a couple of new positions that possibly we think have good reason to allow them to be implemented. But nonetheless, as I said, we're at $1.4 million, $1.5 million, and we're at a $5.3 million request. For me, we got a long way to go yet, because I don't think the taxpayers can afford that kind of a mill rate increase based on where we are right now. So, for me, we still got a lot of stuff to talk about.
But Sean, to put a fine point on that, if in fact we've come up with $1.5 million, what do we need to get us to half that mill rate increase if we even want to go that far? Just a number. $1.5 million more? Is it a,
1.3 more, right? That was
how
earlier
much?
on.
So,
And I'm not suggesting it should rest at half of the request. I just
Right.
want to know what we're looking for.
so back to so this is if we had a mill rate increase to bring us to 34.17, I choose that because it is half of the 1.90 mils increase that my budget had proposed. Presently, the council's adjustments that we have here from general government and Board of Ed, and then the revenue increases that we discussed last week are the 1.4 million that Mr. Orris just mentioned. When you factor that in, we are now from that number, half of the mill increase, we are a little under 1.3 million right here in the center. I don't know if that's highlighted well, but here. 1.271 million is an additional 0.45 mils. That's how far we are from half of a tax increase from what I proposed. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah, it does. And I know some of the answerables in this are going to come out of what we can legitimately use in a way that doesn't throw this budget crazy for the next year from the ARP money.
Correct.
Because I know Rob suggested monies potentially if they were usable for the medical trust fund issue we have as a one-off sort of situation. That's a huge piece of that if that could happen. I know there's elements of I think David mentioned pre-funding some of the financing costs of the wastewater treatment plant and what that adds up to. But I mean, we may be a little closer than we think, but just not tonight because we don't know for sure what's allowable. So I guess my question to David is what's the next step for the council here?
That's the issue with the ARP spending of that money is really on hold until probably May 11th when we get clarification. So we have to continue going through the rest of these items, but how much of the ARP money we're going to be able to spend is on hold until we get an answer.
Right.
Well, we do have other items that we haven't talked about yet that we're not going to tonight because we're past our time.
Right.
We did put $600,000 aside in debt service, for future. Do we want to spend a third of that this year? And, that was set aside for the next couple of years. Do we want to spend a little bit of that now and a little bit of it next year, plan to, and a little bit the year after, especially knowing that we just found out last week that we're going to have $2 million going into that account over the next, that is going to be spent, available to be spent in the future. So, if we got 1.3 million to go, do we want to spend a couple $100,000 there? Do we want to cut some other expenditures and say to Sean, what can we do for a couple $100,000? Board of Ed, a big one, where I let the finance chairman over there know that we wanted to get some updates and some information from them next week. I had said we wanted that for the first week of May. So, there's probably going to be some movement there, some retirements that we didn't know about with teachers. I know they may not be as many as some years, but certainly there are going to be some since January put their budget together and adopted it. So we've got some items that, may be able to come off of theirs as well. So we've got quite a bit, and, we have to have a policy discussion on whether we want to go from $2.2 million in fund balance down to $1 million. It may be the right number. Maybe that there's a little bit of room there because as we heard earlier this evening, there are some expenditures for COVID and some loss of revenues that our money will be able to allow. And that's going to end up lapsing into fund balance. So we've got some things to talk about. Mr. Orris?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but just one other food for thought. I mean, we still have the capital side to think about. And, we've got the Chapman property, which is in there. We've got school modernization. For me, this is more than just trying to get this year's budget to a number that works. It's about setting the foundation so that we can look at a long-term plan that allows us to look at some of these capital improvements that we think we need to address, which is school modernization and potentially, doing some other improvements like the Chapman development. So, I would caution us to look at this in a one-year vacuum and to use too much of the pockets of money we got without thinking about some of these long-term goals that we know we're going to have to face sooner than later, and think about how we're going to roll those on the backs of our taxpayers, because I don't believe we can drop modern school modernization and the Chapman property square on the backs of our taxpayers. We're going to have to find ways to offset that some way, somehow, and it needs to play into our thinking. So I just caution us to kind of be too narrow focused.
I agree with that. And I think Mr. Slocum brought up the fact that we have talked about the fact that sewer and water, we don't have water expense, but sewer expense is going to be one of the allowable expenditures. So maybe we can consider using some of the ARP money that has to be used in the next 30 months to pay down some of the debt service on the sewer plant, so that we will have debt service available, if you will, because we have school modernization to take care of. Some of it may be able to be used for outdoors. And if that's the case, because that people were getting outdoors more, and I believe that may be one of the uses, you know, we may be able to use it to do something with Bartlett or some enhancements to some of our outdoor facilities.
Agreed. Thank you, David.
So I think we're all working towards the same thing. And I think we just have a number of outstanding issues. This late in the game shouldn't be outstanding, but they're beyond our control at the moment, such as the definition of what we're going to be allowed to spend with that ARP money. All right. We're past the witching hour in terms of having our wits about us. And I'm hoping we can all get together next Wednesday and we can get some updates on these. And we also may have some information from the Board of Ed at that time. Does Wednesday work for everybody? Because I know Thursday has ordinance review. They've already booked that date.
We were tentatively scheduling a solid waste meeting for Wednesday, but I could try to move it.
Or earlier, if you want to do your, I don't know what.
Yeah, one of the people couldn't make it until 7, so I could try to make it a different day.
If you could, and I hate to do this to you, and because yours is an important committee that's going to, you know, help with some of the items we talked about earlier, but I don't want to move our meeting to Tuesday because I want to give, I want some April numbers if possible, and certainly Wednesday we'll have a better chance to have April numbers than on Tuesday.
I'll see if the members are available on Tuesday.
Okay.
So what's the problem with Thursday, Dave? Did you say ordinance?
Ordinance committee has already put that date, and they've got the attorney in it.
Gotcha.
With that's already lined up, and they're right at the time. It's not like they're doing a 4 o'clock, which they've done some of.
Yeah, because
Right.
we need the attorney with us too. So,
Yeah.
and he said Wednesday was the best for him, but so I'm gonna have to check.
Well, okay, that puts a different light on it. Let's see what you can do. See
Okay.
what, and let's talk. But I'd like to try for Wednesday or Thursday. Maybe I could talk to David and see if they can get the attorney available a different day.
Yeah, but what I would say, Dave, is I want to make sure that we pick dates that are good for us on the council. And obviously, these are subcommittees of the council, so we need to ensure that they work. But you know, for instance, tonight, I purposely didn't want to have our meeting tonight because I had the potential for a conflict. I thought I was able to resolve it. I wasn't. Ideally, we were setting for Thursday. So I want to be clear. The council's work takes precedent. And so whether it be our subcommittees or our budget meeting or what have you, I want to set dates that are driven by us as opposed to other outside influences, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'd like to say Thursday, but David had to leave early tonight, so we can't talk to him about that. So my second backup would be Wednesday.
No, I'm good with that. I mean, that's a council meeting, so obviously that needs to take precedent. But you know, if there are other conflicts, I know Marilyn had a conflict with Wednesday night because she was doing water pollution, but unfortunately, you know, we need her to focus on the council first and foremost.
Right.
So at the end of the day, if the council needs to meet on a Thursday, so be it. We got to meet on a Thursday.
Yeah.
That's my point.
We could check to see if ordinance could be earlier at 5 or something, or 5:30, and then do a 6:30 on Thursday.
Okay.
I know David had to jump off the call, so I'll
Yeah, he had to leave at 8:15. So, all right, let's see what we can do about that. My expectation is it's going to end up being Wednesday, but hopefully everybody's available. But Thursday would be even better.
Is that
Ordinance
May
is at
4th?
4, Sean.
was that? Sorry, I couldn't hear that part.
Ordinance is at 4 on
Then we
Thursday.
meet Thursday. I thought they were later than that. I'm sorry. All right, so is everybody available next Thursday at 6:30 for a budget workshop and special council meeting? I'm not seeing
Yeah.
any. no's.
I'm good.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, I can do that.
next Thursday, 6:30. Good. All right.
And Sean and Arnett, you know, in terms of staff, you know, if there are other conflicts, you know, I would ask that people, you know, make sure the council is the priority. You know, unfortunately, because, you know, we're working around a lot of schedules. We got a lot going on. We need to get the budget done. And we're trying to pick dates that give you all enough time to be able to get us the information that you need. So I think it's important, you know, we try to drive our schedule as we see fit.
Yep. Yeah, all these dates work fine for us, and staff will make themselves available.
Good. All right. Thank you, folks. Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you, I guess, now that you're.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. I guess the only thing to do is to ask for a motion to adjourn. Is there?
So,
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks. Second, Mr. Walsh. All in favor?
aye.
We are
Aye.
adjourned. Thank you all. Good night, and my apologies for being late tonight.
Good night.
Night,
night.
everybody. Night.